to kick off the conference, I wanted to invite one of my friends, one of my colleagues, and I also call him a mentor to me. Dave Licher is a Northrop Grumman employee, and he has inspired me with a lot of different thought during our different types of meetings. And I thought I would have him come up and give a couple of words about responsibility for KM and motivate, hopefully, everybody.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Yes. So Mark and I had a conversation about a month ago over lunch, and he asked me to come here and get everybody unglued. I said, okay, I could do that. So basically what we were talking about, beyond the technology, we got back to the people side of this whole thing, and we were talking a lot about all the technologies that are out there. There's all kinds of cool stuff, social networking technologies and things. But the bottom line is, this is about social responsibility too. You know, we as individuals, as we experience things through our lives, sharing those with, you know, others in the community, that's part of our responsibility, isn't it? Sharing this stuff. The Indians did a great job of sharing their stories, right? So beyond all the technologies and all the cool fun stuff, we have to get back to the basics and figure out what is it that drives people? What's the glue that makes the lessons stick, right? Because we can document lessons, but what's the glue that makes the lesson stick? Why do I remember that lesson so well? A lot of times it's because of a failure. Very seldom is because of a success, right? So that's what the conversation is really poised around. And I wanted to just start off by sharing a couple of stories. And the first story is basically some of my experience. So I like to start the story by letting people know, as a young child, I had like 200 grandparents. How many of you learned a lot from your grandparents? Something really important, right? And how did you learn that? You learned it because these people really care about you, and you trust them. So building trust is a really big chunk of why we listen to people and why that lesson sticks so well. So I best put that in context, right? How many people have 200 grandparents? Yeah, that's what I thought. So at a very early age, my mom made me aware that she made a promise to a supreme being up there that if he would save this child, she'd take care of his people here that couldn't. So my mom literally, from the time I was born, took care of elderly people in the home with 5 kids, cared for them, cleaned up after them, etc., fed them. So me being the youngest of 5, I got to have like 200 grandparents because, you know, old people, they come in vertical, but they generally go out horizontal. You know what I'm saying? So I not only got 200 grandparents, I also lost 200 grandparents. I learned early on about the value of life and that loneliness people experience, how few people there are to listen, right? What do the people want most at the end of their life? They want somebody to listen to them. Amazing, isn't it? But I'll tell you what, you learn a lot from a lifetime of experience. And all you have to do is sit and listen. And being the youngest, you get to do that, right? You get to hang out. So you're sitting there listening to all these stories and things about people's lives and their experiences. So I got to learn a huge lesson early on in life. A lesson that I think everybody needs to know: listen, right? Some of the best lessons I learned as a young man working in an automotive plant, building engines. It's not super technical, but you know what? There's little tips and tricks that aren't in the book. Some of the best lessons I learned were from a guy who nobody else listened to. The guy was a heroin addict, right? He worked right down the bench from me. The reason I know he was a heroin addict, and that's not secondhand stuff, I had to break down the bathroom door because it was locked for a couple hours and some of us needed to use it. And the poor guy had passed out with the needle in his arm, almost protruding back out because it was hanging out. So I had to revive him and get him the heck out of there. So nobody would listen to this guy, but as a young man, he was sent to Germany, to the Volkswagen school there, to learn how to build engines. So he still had some critical knowledge that was pretty cool. Stuff that wasn't in the book. So did I listen to this guy? Yeah. Why did he share with me? Because I listened to him. I took the time to say, how you doing today? Good morning, how you doing, Al? Al would share with me little tips that made his engines work. Little stuff, like when you're done bolting the connecting rods together, pick up the crankshaft and turn it and watch that all the rods fall down, right? Fall down consistently. Because those rods are going to have to spin really fast when they're in that engine. Can't read that in the book. That piece isn't in there. Laying a feeler gauge next to the connecting rods when you're torquing them. These little lessons. These are things that people share because they care. And that you showed that you cared to listen. So as we go through these and we see a lot of cool stuff, great technologies, it's about the behavior that you exhibit when you're extracting from these people. When you're doing an interview, show the interest, show the passion for the subject, even if it's boring. Some of what turned out to be the most interesting projects I ever did, coming in, I thought they were boring. How about Command Media, right? Coming in, you think that's going to be the most boring gig I ever did. When you learn the opportunities there, embrace it. Make them important, right? So with that whole discussion around people, we have to just keep focusing and centering on, this is all about people. Those wires that we build, those boxes that hold all the data, they connect people. And it's the knowledge in those people's heads. Sometimes the stuff that's not documented is what can keep us competitive. So keep that in mind. Short little other story I'd like to share with you, along that same line about being a young kid listening to people. We had an old fellow that lived there, and this is probably the most valuable lesson. As I look in the mirror today, keep in mind I was about 4 when this incident happened. This fellow loved to sit in the front room and be a part of the conversation, whatever that was. His name was Tom Heffernan, great guy. Kindest, gentlest man you'll ever meet. So he'd always have a poem, no matter what we were doing. He'd be sitting there watching National Geographic, and a pelican would land on the dock, and he'd go, boys, did I tell you about the pelican? His bill can hold more than his belly can. He can get enough in his beak to last him for a week, and I don't see how the hell he can. And we'd laugh, the kids would laugh and say, oh, that's so cute, you know. He always had one. This guy had one for everything that happened. So, again, my mom would come out and say, boys, Saturday, got to mow the yards. Girls, go do the dishes. Tom would say, Jackie, Black Monday, Blue Tuesday, Ash Wednesday, Holy Thursday, Good Friday. Who the heck wants to work Saturday? But see, I was 4 years old. I remembered these things. Those stuck because they were funny to me. One night, we're all there. My older sisters had friends over, and they're having their little chitter-chatter. Tom wanted to be part of the conversation, so he chimed in. Wrong time, I guess. The girls were having a conversation. One of them said, "I'll be quiet, you old fart." Kindest, gentlest man in the world. First time I ever saw him serious. He told all of us kids, come over here. All of you, come over here. We're like, uh-oh. We all circled around his chair. This is a guy who didn't study for this. We all sat there quietly, and he said, now listen here, you younger folks. When you're inclined to pull off jokes, so thoughtless and so rudely bold, of some knothead who is old, whose hair is gray and not so thick, whose teeth are false and maybe click, whose back is turned from toil and tear, who totters as he leaves his chair. Remember when you are poking fun, and ridicule at such a one, that you are kidding when you do, no one except just you. We're thinking it's over, thank God. For life moves fast, my little friends, your youth and beauty quickly ends. And in no time at all, you'll see the scarecrow you turned out to be, right? That stuck, right? Now, I'm only 4, so I had to go, tell me the scarecrow story 25 times or so. But now, whenever there's a reunion in our family, Dave, tell us the scarecrow story. You got to look at what makes things stick. When you're doing these lessons, when you're transferring information that came from experience, what made that stuff stick? What's going to make it stick for the next person, right? That always fascinated me. Those things we remember, think about why we remember them, build that into whatever you come up with, okay? So that's basically it. Now I want to get some of your stories. Come on, somebody's got one. Question. You got no questions? You guys just want to talk about technology, don't you? No? Facebook? Twitter? Negative. All right then.
Just a thought.
Good.
I agree with what you're saying about just the stories that go around it that make the knowledge more relevant. Some of that's difficult in these micro environments, like micro world. That's where that happens.
Difficult. Difficult how?
There's no context. I mean, you know, I'm actually following the tweets that are going on right now. There's all this conference. They're great tweets because I'm sitting in this conference. If I was outside this room, what does it mean?
Right.
You know, so context has a lot to do. And so a lot of that is lost in the micro environment because, you know, a friend of mine who I know very well may post something that's relevant to where they are right then. I know them very well, but I still have no idea what the heck they're talking about or why they brought it up at that particular time. So I'm kind of, the technology is cool and it's valuable in the context.
Right, right. Yeah, and it might be good for getting the conversation going, right? So that could be a good thing. It could be a good primer to get at least the conversation going. Scott, did you have something?
Yeah, Dave, you know, this kind of reminds me of, I was at a big conference not that long ago within my company, and it's one where people come from all different parts in the company. So you would assume that at the break it would be a good opportunity for people to connect, right? And the thing that really struck me at this particular meeting was at the break, everyone would go in the hall and do exactly that.
Oh, yeah.
Right? They do the BlackBerry prayer. And and it just struck me because I just happened to see like 6 or 7 people standing in the hall, not talking to each other, but doing the BlackBerry prayer. And you know, this is a real disadvantage, I think, in today's electronic age. I mean, I wonder if you know, if you had that environment today with your mom, you know, helping those elderly people, would they be on their BlackBerries rather than telling the kids the stories? I think we've lost a lot of that.
That's right.
I think we have, and
That's
that even the art of language and the art of storytelling is almost a lost art today.
Yeah. Well, you know, that's a great point, Scott. And today, it already is that way. You know, my wife and I realized as her elders in her family, which has a really deep heritage, started passing on, there was one elder left, one, that knew some of that history that hadn't been passed down for a whole generation. Her and I went down there to his place in Escondido, sat with him. I literally recorded conversations, their stories, for 8 hours. All my job was to, you know, get the next conversation going. But we learned things from him that were only in his head about a prison in Muley, Mexico or something that her great-grandfather helped build when he was in the Mexican army, right? We'd have never known any of those stories about that history. So we then got to go online, find this prison. We actually took pictures of the prison today, what's left of it. There's a little gift shop and stuff. But we put all of that stuff into a family album for all of our nieces, nephews, and children. But so much came out of those stories. In a short 8-hour stretch, we captured stuff that would have been lost forever to history in 8 hours, right? And then some follow-on research to get some backup cool photos and whatnot, because kids today like photos, just like I did. Sir?
And you use technology to do that. I agree with Scott for the most part, but I think we really need to look at these things as for what they are. They're tools, and it's how we use them that really matters. It's not, we can use the tools stupidly, and drive ourselves further apart, or we can use them intelligently.
Right.
And if we do that, they become sort of that glue. I recently wrote a blog about my belief that that companies can have useful groups working in different parts of the world, that they can relate online, and that, but I still believe they need to get together once in a while, and I experienced that this past June when I went to the Enterprise 2.0 conference in Boston. I met a lot of people that I only knew through Twitter or through their blogs, and comments that I had made in some conversations that we had. And it was wonderful. And that just changed my relationship with them.
That's a perfect point, Rick.
But we met, really through Twitter.
But the point there is we're going to use technology. There's no getting away from technology. That's cool stuff. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we shouldn't use it. We can't all meet face to face. What I'm saying is look at those things that make personal conversations so meaningful and how we behave. You know, when I'm walking into the store with my wife and some guy's walking out the store and I go, hey, how you doing today? And the guy goes, pretty good, how are you? And he keeps walking. She'll look and say, do you know that guy? No, he's just some guy. But you start the conversation that way. It's how we get that going. Sometimes those will lead into something else, right? Well, it's not going that good. Anything I could do to help, right? And right away they go, man, well, why would he care? That's my point, Rick, is let's focus this stuff as close as we can to how well we behave and expect behavior, right? We build these things as just technology, very cool stuff, but if you think about it, the one that comes the closest to real human passion and emotion is the one that's going to work the best, right? You look at YouTube and why it's so popular, because it's showing pictures of stories, right? It's good stuff.
Well, one other thing, I believe this is true, I hear this all the time. One of the really powerful things with social media is that it gives us ways to share a little bit about ourselves. And in doing so, ultimately it builds up trust. And that's how I felt with a lot of these people. It wasn't because I heard one thing they said or I read one thing they said. It was over a period of time, they sent me to read things that I found very interesting and educational. They shared a little bit about their lives. They opened themselves up. They made themselves a little vulnerable. And so I think it really can be used to, I think I'm agreeing with you.
You're right on. You're right on. That's the whole point. How we share, right? We share a little bit of personal stuff with people. They open up. They know now I can trust this person. They wouldn't have told me something like that, right? So that's all I'm saying is the technology's cool. Let's interlace that with the things that we know from history really work well. Because I'm not seeing that today. What I see today is a lot of cold interfaces, right? They're pages and things, but none of them have that invitation, right, to interact that way.
I just got back from the NASA IT Summit, and I had the opposite experience to the other gentleman who said that there was all the BlackBerry prayers going on during the break. Actually, people were doing BlackBerry during the meetings, but out in the hallways between the sessions was total face-to-face networking happening, and it was really dynamic and fantastic. But what I wanted to say is, I'm looking for use cases where social media is being really used for a business use that's really valuable. And here's why. I tried Twitter for the first time at the IT Summit. And when I got back to my room that night, I spent time going through the approximately 500 or 600 tweets that had been during that day, just to see what I could get out of it. And I have to say, even though I'm positive about the technology, there really was very little of value, for the effort that I put into doing that. There were maybe 3 or 4 pithy comments, and they were out of context. So for someone on the outside, I don't know how much they really would gain.
Right.
So again, I say it again, I'm here today, I'm hoping to get some use cases for help.
We've got a couple of good use cases.
People are really using these technologies for really meaningful business purpose.
Yeah, we've got a couple of good ones we can share. So I think, yes.
I like to say, I'm sorry. You're absolutely right, this is a behavior problem. Because I think we should put a challenge to ourselves today. By the end of the day, every one of us you'll find 5 people in this room we don't know anything about and get a face-to-face conversation. And then we will report back at the end of the closing session. One of us, or 2 of us, or 3 of us will come up and say, you know, those are the people I met today. So-and-so is in this field, you know, his subject area is this. I think that makes sense. I think the technology today that people develop is really isolating personal relationships. People will tell other people a lot of things about themselves on a computer. And when they do face-to-face, I'm not going to tell you. And this is where you find out when all of a sudden somebody died. Recently there was a woman jumping off the building and she died. And then people said, yeah, there were signals, there were warnings, but nobody cares. Nobody read it and said, ha, ha, ha. You know, those are the things that we need to avoid, especially young people. People like us, we probably don't want to do that on a computer, but young people will do everything on a computer. So think about it. I think you're right, and how do we develop a personal relationship is really important.
That's huge. Thank you. One more real quick, because Mark, my old boss used to go like this when it was time to get off the stage, and Mark's doing that now.
When I was in college, we used to have a saying, I write letters to my grandparents, I phone my parents, and I email my siblings. And to some extent, you know, and now I'm texting my kids when they're in college. And I see that all as a continuum. I communicate with different people using a whole bunch of different technologies, and the technology is almost immaterial to the messages that we're sharing and the stories that we're telling. You said we should get past the technology. That's what I want to say. I'm as comfortable texting my kids about, you know, their joys, successes, their failures, their heartbreaks, got an A on a test, broke up with a boyfriend, you know, whatever. Right. We can share a lot of things, just doing the BlackBerry prayers. I still call my folks, you know, and I can tell them about my kids, you know, their grandkids. The technology doesn't matter. We're sharing stories. To this woman's point about nonsense.
He knows me.
Somebody recently told me half of everything you learn in college is nonsense, and education is determining the ability to determine which is which. I think with Twitter, probably maybe more than half is nonsense, but I think there's a lot of useful information on tweets. And part of being an intelligent, informed member of this community is being able to sort through and get what you want without fixating on all the chat, separate tweets from the chat.
Good point. Good point. Thank you all.